Hello, and welcome back to the My First Marathon podcast, where we interview runners in all stages of their running careers about their first marathon experiences to prove that anyone can run a marathon. My name is Taylor, and today's runner has 110 marathons under his belt, with a little under half of those being at the Boston Marathon. You may have seen him on TikTok, hashtag slaying the day, or passing on all the tips and tricks for running a marathon and how to find longevity in the sport. I love the running community for bringing runners like this to the show because he was truly such a joy to listen to. Without further ado, let's hear his story. Please welcome Mike. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show this weekend. I'm really excited to meet with you. We just talked a little bit, but found you on TikTok, and I know you do a lot of like advice videos on TikTok and a lot of advice for first time marathoners and things like that. But excited to go through your journey. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Taylor. It's good to be on a podcast, and certainly this is exciting because some of it will end up on TikTok. But
Yep.
yeah, I was not your atypical runner in terms of the traditional runner that was a high school star and stuff like that. I mean, I was decent, but my journey was a basketball journey as opposed to running. So running was a means to stay in shape for basketball. And so actually went to college to play basketball as opposed to running. And when I got to college, I was not coerced, but the cross country coach spotted me running on the side of the road on the way to practice. I was
Yeah.
running to practice from my dorm or something like I can't remember. And he says, "You look like you can run pretty well." And I said, "I'm okay." And so I ran cross country as a freshman and went right into basketball season, played a full season, then obviously ran track in the spring at Merrimack College in North Andover, Mass. Repeated that as a sophomore, repeated that as a junior. And when the spring of my junior year, my teammate, Dave McGilvery, who is now the race director of the Boston Marathon, a great friend, he was running the Boston Marathon. So I went down to the finish with a friend of mine, and I was so exhilarated. I've often said to people, if you watch the Boston Marathon, if you go to the finish, you will, it'll make you want to run the Boston
Yes.
Marathon because it's so exciting. Even the people like me now that are like at the back of the pack, we probably get more love than the fast runners because
Sure.
they
Yeah.
see an old, hunched over old guy, that's basically a cripple out there going, and they get inspired. Oh, man, I could do that. So I said, I'm going to train for it and I'm going to qualify. So that summer, I did a lot of running between junior and senior year of college. And when I got back to college, we started, you know, basketball, fall session. And I snuck up to Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, which is the first um, town to vote in the presidential election. And I
Yeah.
ran the Dixville Notch Marathon, totally expecting to run under 3 hours. I mean, that's what I thought I could do because I was fairly fast. And I got to 17 miles and hit that wall
Yep.
and limped in 3 hours and 39 minutes, which is not terrible. But I was disappointed and went back, practiced. I think we had a couple games early in the season. I know we had games over Thanksgiving, and then the first week of December, we had a weekend off. And I drove to New Jersey and ran the old Jersey Shore Marathon, which, if I'm not mistaken, it was on the Jersey Shore, but at some point during that marathon, I believe you ran underwater because you ran in a tunnel. I thought that was
Cool.
pretty cool. And I
Yeah, that
qualified.
is.
I ran under 3 hours, so I qualified for the 1978 Boston Marathon and um, went through the basketball season. Didn't do a whole lot of long runs. Got to April, and I had to play in some all-star basketball game for college, and that game was the day before my first Boston Marathon. So I played a full 40-minute game, then drove down to
Wow.
Hopkinton or wherever and um, had a steak dinner and then put on my Nike nylon Cortez, which is now a casual shoe, or a turtleneck, like the turtlenecks that,
Yeah.
like you see in Christmas Vacation that Uncle Eddie or Cousin Eddie wore, and had a singlet over it. Shorts were like really, really short. The picture from my first Boston Marathon, you can't see my shorts. And I ran under 3 hours, and then which qualified me for 79. And then it just kept going and going. And I never real I mean, during those early years, I got faster because I stopped playing basketball. I graduated from college with a degree in accounting
Hmm.
and started teaching for 3 years. And I was teaching in the wrong curriculum. So I worked a summer for Nike for Phil Knight,
Cool.
and Converse, the running shoe company, recruited me as a specialist, a promotional specialist, because I was pretty good at marketing. And so I worked for Converse and then got really smart, because, that experience with Nike and Converse, I said, it was the running boom. So I opened up my own business and did that for 15 years and then sold it in 1996 and went back into the teaching field.
Mm,
So I've been a marketing, finance, accounting teacher and a retail store owner, footwear expert, if you will. But
yeah.
every April, I've gone back to Boston. I used to live in New Hampshire,
Mm,
so Boston was in my backyard. But in 2003, um, my family moved to South Georgia because my former wife, she wanted to go back home to where
mm,
she lived, and I said that's fine. So I raised two kids in South Georgia, and then I just this summer moved to Easley, South Carolina, which is right in Clemson's backyard.
yeah.
And I live here because my daughter lives here. My son lives in Nashville, Tennessee. He works for Barstool Sports.
Oh, cool.
And all along the way, every year, I've done this, thing called the Boston Marathon, and I've run 110 marathons. So I've run 63 other marathons besides
Yeah.
Boston.
Very cool. Okay, wow. So your journey, I mean, Boston is clearly the highlight. It's the race that you keep coming back to. Why do you feel like Boston is that race for you that you keep coming back to?
Well, as you get older, you realize the history, the tradition, and I didn't realize it when I was younger. I didn't. I guess I took it for granted. I didn't realize how special it was to qualify. Like I just figured everybody qualified.
Yeah.
And Dick Beardsley and I had this conversation. We just assumed back then that everybody qualified for Boston, you know?
Mm,
And I think there was a lot less runners back then. I think like either you were really fast and qualified for Boston or you didn't run. So they didn't have the charity runners back then. It was just everybody was pretty fast. So
yeah.
I never realized, it didn't dawn on me till now with the exposure of TikTok and, Instagram, how, that carrot is dangled in front of the rabbit. And so it is pretty special. But it gets harder every year because it beats me up because
Sure.
it's a downhill start with a lot of rolling downhill for the first 15 and a half miles. And then you hit 16 and you're uphill for about five.
Yeah.
And then you roll in. But there's a lot of, I just try to have fun along the way. But, if it gets to the point of, between me and my general health, like I don't want to be, um, you know, crippled for life because I wanted to do one extra Boston Marathon.
Sure.
For instance, this morning I went out and I walked 7 miles and it was comfortable. I was stiff, a little bit soreness here and there, typical arthritis, but I want to be able to do that. I'm not going to sacrifice another, if Boston is going to work for me, it's going to work for me. But if it isn't, I'm not going to go to the starting line. I wouldn't do that. Plus, I don't believe that, if you're doing, just trying to get across the finish line, my philosophy is if I'm doing 7.5 or 8 hours, I personally don't belong there because there's something seriously wrong. And
Sure.
I just don't want to, it's not saying that somebody that does a 7.5 or 8 hour marathon is bad or anything. It's just for me, I know physically I'm capable of doing a lot better.
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah. So cool. So Boston's changed a lot over time. And if you remember from like the first maybe 10 Boston, it's still crazy to say first 10 Boston experiences, but for your first 10 or so, like what how were the goals shifting, like, from race to race? Because it's the same course every time, so I imagine that you would approach it pretty similarly, but how did the goals shift for you for those first, like, stack of them?
That's a great question. I mean, the first year was, the excitement of it. In terms of this is the first Boston, I was excited that, I got caught up in the hoopla. And back then, there the crowds were just as great, but they were on top of you. There was no restraining fences. Like they
Mm,
were literally, it was like an accordion. So as you ran through, people would be right on top of you, and it was exciting. And then as the first 5 years, I got faster. So
mhm.
by 1982, I'm running the 230s, so I'm in the top 100.
Wow.
So in 82, I remember that in particular, where, Dick Beardsley and Al Salazar had the famous duel in the sun. Um, I was in the top 100. And I remember coming through Kenmore Square, which is about the 25-mile mark. And I was coaching at the time, and one of my college athletes was on the course, and he's screaming at me, Mike, you're in the top 100, keep it up. And I'm
Yeah.
running like 5:55 a mile for that, because and it was exciting and everything. And as I went on, every year I would try to, make sure that A, I requalified, and B, I came in the top certain amount. Like as the population increased, coming in the top 100 was not as doable as 500, and so on and so forth. And back then, your number, there was no chips, there was no bib number chips. You
Mm,
were lined up based on your qualifying time. So they put
mm.
you in corrals.
Yeah.
So let's just say I had number 697. I would be in corral number 2 with 500 people. But if people moved up and kind of cheated their way up, when you crossed the starting line, if you had number 697, it might take you 35, 45 seconds. Your bib number indicated they gave you like 30 seconds. So some of my times were probably tainted because I didn't get across the start
Oh,
line
that makes sense, yeah.
quick. So in some instances, that wasn't fair because I never cheated up. I just didn't feel that was right. I
Sure.
was on the one year. I was on the front line because I had a real good qualifier. I'd run low 230s, and I'm on the starting line. I think it was 85 or 86, and a guy by the name of Rob DiCastella. He was a world class runner. He got caught up because they have ropes that were corrals, and they forgot to take the rope up, and he tripped over it,
Oh,
and he
no.
fell. And I tried to help him up, but I was running by him, so I couldn't grab him. And he got up and he set the world record. He literally
Wow.
fell and got up and ran 2:07:51, which was very impressive. And
Yeah.
he was an Olympian. He was one of the all-time great marathoners. So I went from seeing Boston as a amateur marathon
Yeah.
until 1985, and in 1986 they started offering money. So it's become a very prestigious a marathon. And I do feel bad for people that don't get in and miss qualifying by seconds, literally,
Yeah.
because you might qualify but you might not get in because there's just so many people. And then the argument, why don't they let more people in? Logistically, they can't because it
Right.
starts in such a small, small town. It starts in Hopkinton, Mass, which is very tiny. And you've got to run through, all the little towns, Ashland and Framingham and Natick and Wellesley and so on and so forth. And that's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it with all the things that are going on in this world, I hope that we have a Boston Marathon in April because it's we went through the 2013 experience. I just don't want to endorse something like that again.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it is a sensitive topic when you start talking about some of this stuff, but I think that the issue of having too many people is something that you could take a million different opinions on. I don't think there's any right answer for it. But for you, for when you're approaching like a training cycle for something like Boston, when you know the route so well, is it kind of like a rinse and repeat sort of training plan for you, or do you make any tweaks to your training plan when you're setting up like a training block for a race like that?
Well, for me now, a training block is just maintenance.
Yeah, just
I,
maintaining.
I, I have a completely different philosophy. It used to be, I would I'd work up to, 24 miles, indicator runs where you would, after your Saturday long run of 22, 23 miles, you'd go out and hit a 10 miler at, race pace and so on and so forth. I did that for years. Now, this year, I'm taking a completely different approach. I'm just trying to see if I can maintain a long runs up to 5 hours of time on my feet,
Yeah.
because the enthusiasm of the crowd it'll get you through the first half. Like it's almost like, okay, if I do 2.5 or 2:20 for the first half, I can walk the second half and still come in under the allotted time. But, it's in training for it, you have to train on downhill as much as uphill, because there's so much downhill and it bangs your quads up.
Mm.
So when you get to Newton Lower Falls, that's the last of downhill, and it's a big downhill. I think it's at 25 kilometers, and it's a
Yeah.
long, long, like it's probably a half mile of almost straight downhill, and you're like, man, I am in great shape. I'm flying, and then
Yeah.
it goes up as quick as it goes down. And you hit 16 miles. You're like, oh my gosh, what just happened to me? You feel like so you really hill training is huge. So when I was living in South Georgia, I lived in the flattest um, section of the country. It's called the coastal plain,
Mm.
which is completely flat. So I couldn't train from 2003 to, just coming up here to South Carolina, which has a lot of hills. I was void of hills. So I'd get up there, and the downhill section of the race would beat me up as much as the uphill. I did have some good races even in my 50s. I was low threes and stuff like that. But
Yeah. Wow.
eventually, it just took its toll. Which it makes sense. One of these days, none of us are going to be running. You just have
Sure.
to accept it and say it's okay. It's it's
Yeah.
it's fine, and encourage the younger generation, whether it's Boston or Chicago or LA, that's your highlight, no matter what the time is.
Yeah.
And I don't pay shame, and I love it that I see all abilities on TikTok. I see 6 hour marathoners, I see 5 hours, I see 4, 3, so on and so forth. And I'm just as happy for somebody that runs 2:45 as I am that runs 6:45. But I don't think anybody should boast about it. I don't think that you should come off as like, oh, this is me and this is why I'm so great at giving advice. The advice that I give is mostly through mistakes I've made. So
Sure.
that's the best thing I could, give to somebody.
Yeah, and I think that that's the best way for people to learn too. To somebody like you that has so much longevity in the sport to be able to offer like, no, hey, I've already been through these experiences and this is what I've learned. I think that's so much more helpful than anybody who's done like the 2:30 marathon and is able to give advice on it, because that's not going to be advice for everybody. But what are some of those, if you don't mind me asking, like some of those mistakes that you've made over time that you've now been able to pass on to others as advice?
The number one is overtraining.
Mm.
Overthinking how many miles you need to run per week. That's probably the biggest thing. I've left my race on the practice course many years. I'll give you for instance, this
Yeah.
past spring, leading up to Boston, I got in amazing shape and I ran 3 sub 2 hour half marathons within 2 months.
Wow.
Why? And it beat me up. In fact, I
Yeah.
think that's why now I'm just like really like my everything's kind of like stiff and hurts and stuff, but I really banged myself up. So when I got to Boston, um, I didn't feel great at Boston. It was a little warm, but I went out the first half and I was running, walk, run, walk, run, walk, run, walk, and I did like a 2:20 first half, and it didn't feel good. So I had my cell phone with me to record my TikToks, and I called my son and I just said, Jared, I said, Dad's going to take it easy the second half. It's going to be a few hours before I get in. And it was tough. It was real tough. And so I think overtraining, over racing is probably the thing that we all do, because even when I was younger, um, and fast, relatively speaking, I think I ran one year, I ran three sub 240 marathons in one calendar year. I mean, why was I doing that? And that just, overtraining is probably the biggest thing, or over racing,
Hmm.
overthinking, is going out too fast. That's another one, when you go out too fast in any race, and I'm guilty of it. Not so much in the marathon. I've been pretty disciplined. I've only dropped out of two marathons. I've started 112. I've dropped out of two. One, I popped a hamstring. It wasn't Boston. It was another one, and I had to stop at 16. And then the other one, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trial standard C. They used to, back in the day. Now they don't have it anymore. They had a hard time getting people qualified for the Olympic trials, and sometimes they would make standards like standard A was 218, standard B was 225, and they had a standard C that was, I think it was 229 at the time. And I was pretty close to it. And so I was running the Ocean State Marathon in Rhode Island, and I got halfway, or 16 miles, and I said, I ran like two consecutive 5:45 miles, which was too slow. And I just dropped out. So, uh, you know, the point being, I gave up on something. I probably would have had a PR at the time, but
Sure.
definitely, um, overtraining is probably the biggest thing, and being almost, when you come into the race, a situation where you're not healthy because you're just tired going into the race, and that's not
Right.
a good. I'd rather be undertrained and healthy than overtrained and hurt, and have the chance to hurt myself. And I am the worst at resting. I'm not good at it. I give the advice, but I need to do a better job of that. I need to sit on the couch like I am right now with my feet up and watch TV. I need to do that,
Yeah.
you know, because I'm retired now. I'm not, well, I'm doing a little coaching, on the
Sure.
college level, but it's not extensive. I go on road trips and stuff for Anderson University. Um, I'm always up and about, and I like to go to the YMCA and cycle and lift
Yeah.
and do this and do that. And it's at age 68, soon to be 69, that's not probably the best thing for me to do. I need to rest more, because, you know, I give that advice to you and other people, but, I need to take it myself. Yeah.
Definitely easier to give out advice than it is to take it. I think we can all all agree with that for sure. And I mean, so much. I have so many questions. I think I'll start with like longevity in the sport. I would imagine, and especially overtraining, like you were mentioning, like over racing, overtraining. I would imagine you've had points of burnout in your career. Would it be safe to say that?
Oh, yes. I mean, I would always get discouraged when I was younger if I didn't run well. I'd go into a race, and back then, if you were running sub 16 for 5K or sub 32 for 10K, if you go to a race, you're probably going to be in a position to come in the top five.
Mm,
And then if you blew up in a race, you get very discouraged. I remember one 10K, I thought I was going to win, and I only ran 33 minutes. I came in fifth or sixth, and I sulked and went home, and I said, I'm not going to run anymore, and this and that and the other thing. And the next day I was out running. It
yeah.
just, but yeah, you get stale, and I've had those. And for me to refresh, I would always go to another activity in order to get, especially with injuries. If I get hurt, you know, doing like cycling is a good alternative. Um, Activity, swimming, rowing on the concept to rower, or in the
Yeah.
water. I was also a big rower, like in the water. I was as good at rowing as I was in running. And honestly, it probably helped my running because it got me off the road. So,
Mm-hmm.
say I'd go to a race rowing, which, we raced 2,000 meters, I'd go row on the head of the Charles and row in a race, and I wouldn't run that day, which really was smart. I just didn't realize it. And I had an Achilles injury once, and I the the physical therapist that I went to said you can do one of two things: you can keep running and end up in surgery, or you can stop running for just 3 weeks, 3 weeks, and do something else, and you'll be fine. And he was right. I got
Yeah.
I went back to the rowing. I didn't cycle because I believe that the Achilles is tender for cycling, so I'd stuck to rowing. But anytime I've gone to cross training for an alternative exercise, it's always cleared up the problems. And so it just goes to show that if you stop an activity like running, that's if something's bothering you when you run, then you probably should stop running and give your body a break and maybe cycle, maybe swim, maybe do nothing, which I'm terrible at doing at, and it'll clear up. The
Yeah.
body, what a machine the body is. It really is.
Yes.
But it also
Yes.
tells us when things are wrong, and and we all know that running, exercise in general, is a addictive thing. We get
Yes.
addicted to it. It feels good. You you like to tell people about it, even though nobody really cares.
Yeah.
The whole 9 yards. So, I see that in the on TikTok with people that get so enthused, and I go, please don't get hurt, please don't get hurt, because they get so excited, and then boom, that's what happens because the body just wears out, and bam. So yeah, that's happened to me. I've always loved it.
Yeah.
I've always loved it. That's why I was out walking this morning. I did a few strides just to make sure my body could still run, but it's very addicting. And I was a
Definitely.
little, like I said, I was a little sore afterwards, and that's why this is perfect timing because I can sit on the couch and not worry about going exercising someplace. It's great.
Yeah, we'll just talk about running. We won't we won't do the actual thing.
Exactly right.
Well, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you take I think the question that I get often when it comes to injuries is like, you take those 3 weeks off, you do something different, like rowing or another sport, and then everybody's always worried about losing that endurance. Do you find that when you take those breaks that you actually lose your running endurance, or like if you do, how much build back do you have to do after you take that break?
You get stronger. You do. You every time that something like that's happened to me and I came back, I was stronger. It's
Yeah.
amazing. If you have an athletic base, especially as I got older, no, even when I was younger, before the '83 Boston Marathon, I took it was like from January to March, 6 weeks where I did very little running because I hurt my knee and I didn't know why. And I didn't go to the doctor. I just cycled. And I went into Boston with one 15-mile run. One. I went to Boston. I go, "Oh, this is going to be awful. It's going to be terrible." And I ran 2:41, which
Wow.
is like 6:15, 6:20 a mile, and my knee never hurt. And so the athletic base, the muscle memory, and everything like that, it's amazing. I told my daughter, I said, I could probably not run from now until April 21st, heal up completely, gain 10 pounds, and probably do Boston faster than I did last year.
So funny.
And she says, you're probably right. I think that's an exaggeration. I would have to do something, but
Sure.
I definitely don't have to do as much weight bearing exercise. What I mean by weight bearing exercise is walking and running. So
Mhm.
anytime you're on your feet, you have the chance of hurting something. So I should spend more time on the bicycle. I should. I like tomorrow morning. I should just go to Planet Fitness and jump on the bike and not run or walk because I think I did 8 or 10. Yes, I can't remember. It was a run walk, and I did 7 this morning. I don't need to run. I'm just going to wear those everything out. So
Sure.
um, I always came back stronger. Every single injury, I could line them up. Boom, 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 boom. But up here, you think, oh, I'm going to get fat. I'm going to get slow, um, so on and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, when you get up every morning we get out of bed, we're probably the most rested. Now, we might be stiff, but you're the most rested that you probably are. And that's why when you get out the door, you do your little stretch and so on and so forth. And then you get out there and you feel pretty good because you've had a good night's sleep. Now that I'm in my retirement, I can sleep more because I probably did a disservice to myself all the years of teaching because I get up at 4:30 in the morning, go for a
Yep.
run, 5 or 6 miles, teach all day on my feet, coach, probably run with the kids, then go home and repeat. I was getting like 6, 7 hours of sleep a night. That's not enough. I like the rule of thumb. There was somebody on TikTok that said it. You should get 8 hours of sleep. Plus, for every minute that you run, you should another, like, say if you ran 60 minutes, those you
Yeah.
should get 9 hours sleep. So I
Oh,
like
I've
that.
never heard that. I like that.
It
Yeah.
was it was a young lady on TikTok, and I can't remember who it was, and I didn't favor it or anything. I just
Yeah.
watched it and I go, the old man learned something. That was pretty good. Because I think that when you retire from actual work, that your body goes, you
Time for
know,
a break. Yeah.
it is. But I like I said, I want to be able to exercise as long as long as I'm still moving. I want to keep moving. I guess that's my point. But I don't want to jeopardize that. And Boston is the only race, if you want to call it. I call it an activity. But I don't need to be doing these little 5Ks. People say,
Sure.
"Come run this 5K," and I can't go to a 5K and walk it. I get out there and I see somebody
Full
my
speed.
age, and boom, it's like the half marathon, those sub 2 hour, and they were like 157, 156. They were pretty good, under 9 minutes a mile, but I banged myself up. And for what? First place in the age group, who cares, right? You
Right.
know, it's exactly it. So I want it. I want everything to be enjoyable.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I don't want it to be painful. Um, and that's what I told my children. That's what I tell people. If I suddenly say I'm not going to be in Boston this year, people go, "Oh, it's too bad." But whether I've run 47 in a row or 27 in a row or 7 or 1, it doesn't change me as a person. If I can't relate to a younger runner and give them advice, then what good am I? You know? And I look at some of the world class people that I, ran against back in the day, Jeff Smith and Dick Beardsley and Bill Rogers. Um, Dick, like I said, had knee replacement. One of the
Hmm.
nicest guys in the world, same age as me, but he can't run. He's envious of me because I'm still, running. Bill Rogers, I think he still gets out there, but he doesn't do marathons because he goes, that's insane. And he won Boston 4 times,
Crazy.
and he was a world class marathoner. A lot of them um, gave up for different reasons, health issues, or the fact that they just got slower and they didn't like being slower. I mean, that's a legitimate, like, what do they have to prove to anybody? Just like
Right.
I don't have anything to prove to anybody, because who really cares, how fast you were. So yeah, I'm enjoying this.
That's good. Yeah. And do you remember like when you made that turning point where you were like, okay, I think I've ran the fastest marathon that I'm going to run, and then you started to maybe have to like reframe your relationship with running. Like what was that experience like? Cuz I would imagine that wasn't easy to have to come to terms with the fact that okay, hey, that was my fast years and now I'm going to form a new relationship with running now.
That's a great question, by the way, because I asked that question when I was young. I traveled with a gentleman. He's way before your time. Arthur Lydiard is one of the most famous running coaches of all time, and he wasn't an Olympian, but he was a New Zealand Olympian coach, and he had some great athletes, Rod Dixon and um, Lorraine Moeller, and I asked them as they got older, and I think it was Rod. He won the New York City Marathon in '83. He's the one that, the poster of him, the joy of victory and agony of defeat. Jeff Smith's in back of him, laying on the ground, and Rod's like this. I said, Rod, as you've gotten older, and is it okay to slow down? is it okay with you? And he says, in his New Zealand accent, which I can't imitate, he said,
Sure.
running is still running. He says, when I was running the 5K, sub, I mean, he was like, I think he might have gone under 14. I can't
Wow.
remember, but he said, I still love it and it's still special. So I asked a lot of those people, I go, are you okay with slowing down? And everyone, the answer was yes. You just have to get your brain to say, it's okay not to be in first place. And when I see those older guys at the Boston Marathon every year, and I see, they've put on a few pounds, they don't run anymore, and so on and so forth, they still look good and, they still are the same person, you know, I still see him as a world class runner. But if you walked up to him, you would say, that's just an older guy that's overweight, you know?
Sure.
So I've accepted it, but I guess after when I figured out in about 2000, the year 2000, that I wasn't going to run any more sub 3 hour marathons. That was kind of the point. I think I ran my last sub 3 hour marathon in 2001 or 2002, which
Hmm.
is still pretty good because I was 40, 43, 44. That's still pretty good.
Yeah.
And I ran it, and it was, I think it was a little under 7 minutes a mile, and that was the last time. And then I kind of creeped and creeped, and then once, I got to the point of, I didn't have to run Boston fast. It just was. I'd go up there. I'd travel up there from Georgia, fly up there, and when you travel, it's tough. It really is, and
Yeah.
um, the whole logistics of Boston. It was just a long day. So I decided I'm just going to enjoy it. So this past year, I did my OOTD on TikTok the night before Boston. And usually I'll get, a typical TikTok like that gets like 50 likes. It got
Yeah.
thousands. And it was, I tagged Boston College in it. And so along the course last year, I had people screaming at me, come take a selfie. I know you from TikTok, you're TikTok, And
So
so
cool.
when I got to Boston College, I I did my traditional, I swapped my shirt out at Boston College. And I have a shirt that says, I love Wolsey College. And I rip it off at Boston College. And underneath it has a shirt that says, I love Boston College.
Oh, so cool.
And I made a TikTok with that, and the kids went nuts. And so they hyped my finish line video, which, by the way, um, my TikTok at the finish line last year, when I made it, I I'm not pretty. I don't run with a cell phone like this. I don't. And so when I was doing the finish, it was a terrible video. Like
Hmm.
I was literally running and I was bouncing and I was like, and I was tired. And I made the TikTok, and somehow Boston College got it, and they hyped it, and it got millions and millions of views. And
So
that's where
cool.
the whole TikTok thing um, came. And I ended up selling that TikTok to some company that wanted to use it as a motivational um, video or whatever.
Wow.
But it's so funny that somebody that didn't even have a cell phone, did that. But if I get to the finish of the Boston Marathon this year, I'll do the same thing. I don't know if it'll get that hype, but I think the longevity of it and the fact that I've done it so many times and my age and so on and so forth. I think that has a lot to do with it. And I'm a fairly wholesome guy, that's relatable. I'm like
Yeah.
the granddad. I'm the grandfather runner, so to speak. But one thing interesting about the Boston Marathon for me is we wear numbers on our back.
Hmm.
And the number is pretty cool because the number indicates how many consecutive Boston marathons you've done.
Cool.
So as you're running and all these people are passing you, because we start in the second wave, they're all like giving you a pat on the back, and that's as inspiring as running it itself. So
So cool.
that's kind of cool.
That is. I don't know if I'd be able to contain myself if I had my number on my back and I was getting all that encouragement. Like that's just got to be unreal to feel that in a race.
It really is, and people are so genuine, and they know that. because of my age. And I mean, there's some guys my age who are still running, under 4 hours, and some are even faster than that. Um, but most of us are moving pretty slow,
Yeah,
like a fast walk and so on and so forth. But we're still out there. That's the point.
definitely. That's all that matters. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit too about. I know you've ran the majority of your marathons non-Boston qualify or not non-Boston marathons. So, what is the difference for you between running like a Boston race and running just like a local other race?
Well, there's still 26.2 miles, but
Sure.
some of the smaller ones, I did were more for speed, like you didn't have as crowded. I won one, that was exciting.
So
Um,
cool.
Also, I think Lowell, Massachusetts has one called the Bay State Marathon, and that's a flat two loop course, which I lived 20 minutes at the time from Lowell, Mass. That was a fun one because you knew you were going to, you do 2 laps. It was flat. It was always in the fall. Very nice course and so on and so forth. That was pretty cool. The one race I ran a lot that nobody ever talks about, I've never seen anybody on TikTok or anybody that I talked to, that I ran Bermuda Marathon 9 times.
Mm.
Bermuda has a marathon in January. It's in 2 weeks, and it's a marathon weekend with a 10K, a half marathon, so on and so forth. And I ran that for about 9 years, from 85 to 93, and go down every year. So that was kind of cool. But there's I've run New York City a couple times in the
Hmm.
80s, but my experience with New York wasn't the same as the. I don't want to sound like arrogant or anything, but when I ran New York, I was in that seated group.
Hmm.
And I don't know how they do it now because I haven't been in years. But back then, we started like in that Verrazano Bridge area, and there was a group of us, and it was just us. And so I was running, you know, in the top 100 most of the race. So I didn't experience the masses as they do now. And so
Gotcha.
it's a
Yeah.
different experience back then. I've run Montreal, Chicago, before it became big. Montreal was one of my favorites all time. That was a good one. And then I've run Atlanta a number of times, and you know, this, you know, there's just a lot of little ones, like Keene, New
Sure.
Hampshire, and there's some that don't even exist anymore because the race director quit or passed away or whatever. So I just had the blessing of being able to run so many, and it's kind
Yeah.
of cool to reflect back on it. And oh yeah, I remember that one, and so on and so forth. And a lot of them, like I said, don't even exist anymore.
Yeah. So cool. And I guess if for a local race to fit Mike's criteria, like what are the couple of things that you're looking for in a race for it to be like this is a race that I want to run?
It's got to be certified,
Mm,
meaning back in the day, not so much now, but you want to go to a race that is certified. I ran one I'm not going to say where it was, but this year, and it was a 5K, and it turned out to be 2.5 miles.
mm,
Certification in a race, especially in a marathon, if the race isn't certified, you can't qualify for Boston. So
right.
certification is huge. Um, Results are huge to me. The race going off at the correct time is huge to me. Um, Accurate time, the splits, whether they have them, because now we have our Garmin's and all that stuff. We didn't have them back in
Yeah.
the day, but you want the course well marked. You don't want to go off course, so on and so forth. All these things. And then you want the results after the race to be immediate, especially if there's any awards. If you have to stay around for awards and you have to wait for 2 hours, those were always my selling points on the race. And of course, the merch and the swag bags and stuff like that are cool
Yeah.
too, in this day and age. But now there's medals that I see your medals behind you. I I don't even have my medals from other marathons. When I moved, I just kept my Boston ones. So,
Yeah.
you know, I only have, well, there's a couple hanging here from when I came up here, but those are, that's critical to me. But I'd say the number one thing would be the accuracy of the course. Is it the right distance? Because if it's not, you're going to have a false PR, which was very common in the 80s. And,
Yeah.
I did run a marathon that was short, and so I don't count it as my PR because I know it was short.
Yeah.
When the last mile was 3 minutes and 42 seconds, I don't think that
Something's
was
up.
correct, because I
Yeah.
was running 6 minute pace, and all of a sudden I'm done. I think it was short by half a mile. You know,
Wow. That's a
so
lot. Yeah. I haven't thought about that, a certified course, and them cutting it. Like, yeah, I guess just with the age of having a Garmin and everything is just not something that I've even considered. That makes a lot of sense.
And the only reason I have a Garmin is because in Boston 2020, the COVID year,
Yeah.
the way we kept our streaks alive and everybody that entered was allowed to run, but you had to run in your hometown or some
Mhm.
other. You had to do something and submit it. So for the people that had the streaks, you had to do 26.2 miles that weekend. You had a weekend to do it. And then you had to submit it. I didn't have a Garmin, so I had to buy a Garmin. I didn't know how to work a Garmin or anything. And I had to
Yeah.
link it to my computer and send it in. And it was amazing. Like it literally, the Garmin sent it to Boston, and within 10 seconds, I had a message: Congratulations, you
Wow.
finished the Boston Marathon. And so it kept my streak alive. Now, some people that year didn't do it, but their streaks stayed intact. They just lost a year. That's all. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit shady in that respect. And then we came back in 2021. It was the only year the Boston Marathon was run in October rather than April. So it's very interesting.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure just you've watched the running landscape change so much over time. I can't even imagine. Is there some things that has changed since you started running to now that you really love, that you've been like excited about the changes for?
Well, I think that the technology, the fact that you can have a Garmin, you know, to measure what you've done, because back in the day, if you and I went out for a run in
Yeah.
1981, you'd come over to my house and you'd say, "Well, Mike, I want to run 10 miles." And we'd go out, and you had a stopwatch, maybe. And you'd get in, you'd be 20 minutes out, and you'd say to me, "Well, how far have we gone?" I'd say, "Oh, about a mile and a half." And
Yeah.
and you'd get overwhelmed. Like I remember running with these fast guys, and we'd be out, and I'd look at my watch, and it was said 50 minutes, 50 minutes. And I'd say to myself, I'd divide that by seven, because we're usually running 7 minute miles, and hope that, we're at 7 miles. And I'd say to my friend, "How far are we along?" And he'd say, "Oh, about five and a half." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So some people's courses were short and some people's courses were long. So I love that technology. I do like the cell phone, because back in the day, if you got hurt, or you I'll just say hurt, like you were out on a 10 miler and you're 5 miles in and you pop a hamstring, your only way back was to either thumb or walk, because there was no cell phones, no way. You often brought a dime or 35 cents so you could go to a payphone. That was cool. The running shoes have improved drastically,
Right. Yeah.
in terms, and the running, the apparel, all of that has
The
been
gear. There's so much now that you can get into.
in the replacement drinks. When I
Yeah.
first started out in the 70s, the replacement drinks, because water was okay, but we didn't have bottled water back then, as you well know. But for a replacement drink, we would take Coca-Cola, shake it up, leave the cap off overnight, and it was defizzed. So defizz Coke was the choice of most
Wow.
runners, because it gave you the sugar and the
Yeah.
caffeine, but you didn't burp because it was non-carbonated. So I've seen
Right.
a lot of improvements in that direction, and you know, um, and more people are out there doing it. We had the running boom and the fitness boom of the early '80s. You had running and aerobics. Those are
Mm.
the two big categories. And I saw that just boom. And I took advantage of it being in the industry, footwear industry. So I made a living from it. But the aerobic days of gyms and ladies doing aerobics. So you see, the 80s outfits. That was real. That was real. That was the era that people started saying, I'm going to start getting in shape and so on and
Hmm.
so forth. And I'm glad it changed. But running has definitely improved a lot. And I think that more people are doing it. That's the biggest thing. It's not as fast as the average times may not be as fast, but there's more people doing it, and that's all that matters to me. So I am privileged, blessed to go out and run on these trails here in Easley, South Carolina, as well as Clemson. Trails meaning they're off-road, paved, beautiful trails for miles and miles, and I'll see people running, walking, so on and so forth. And that's very encouraging. And it's a lot safer too.
Yeah.
Um, I don't like, one of the negatives I don't like is the fact that women like yourself feel unsafe, running
Yeah.
alone. That bothers me. That really, really bothers me, that's the age we live in, unfortunately. And,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not a woman, but I carry mace,
Yeah.
and you just never know. I mean, I'm a guy, and I see somebody that looks shady. I'm like, oh goodness.
Yeah.
Or
Maybe I should cross the street, something
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
that's exactly right. So yeah, a lot of changes.
Definitely. Yeah, and it is sad. There should be no barrier to run. I mean, running itself is it's something that should be accessible to so many people. I know it's impacted my life in so many positive ways. You obviously could say something very similar. But there should be no barriers to get into running. It is sad that we're in this climate where you have to be afraid to go out and run, I know there's precautions that you can take, but I hope that we move in a better direction for
It's
sure.
freedom. It's freedom.
Yes, yes, it is. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, cool. I wanted to ask you about some advice too, because I know there's little nuggets of advice throughout the show. But if you could boil down like one piece of advice that you'd offer somebody who's thinking about running their first marathon or really early on in their running journey, what do you think that advice would be?
As far as a marathon goes, is don't put any time stipulations on it. Do what's best for you as far as your training plan. You might get advice from a number of people, but do what you're comfortable with, and make sure before you do the marathon is your time on your feet. If you think you're going to be doing 5 hours for a marathon, is do an activity that is 5 hours, and don't beat yourself up. I mean, that's to stay in the sport as long as I have, you can't beat yourself up. You're not going to PR every time. When you're younger, you might, but you have to look at, when you get to be my age, you're never going to run as fast as you were back in the day. And, keep it enjoyable, keep it enjoyable, like look forward to it, and that's probably the biggest thing for me is leave when you do an activity, look forward to tomorrow. Say, I could have done more today, but I want to be able to run tomorrow. So I don't want to be, hurting, when I go to bed tonight. I want to be able to get up and do something tomorrow. So that's probably the biggest thing for me.
Cool. I love that. Yeah, being able to look forward to it. You want to miss running a little bit. You want to be able to look forward to it and do it. So I
Yes.
think that's great. Well, cool. Well, and then the last couple of questions I like to ask are just more fun questions. Just kind of comparing different data points from people, and I think you having a more unique experience is going to be cool to hear. But about fuel and shoes, what have you liked for fuel options? Maybe like coming from the uncarbonated Coke back in the day to now. What have you liked in terms of fuel over time?
Well, I haven't changed really. I still pre-run, pre-race is Pop Tarts,
Mm,
and there's a lady on TikTok. She's called Nutrition for Runners. She's a nutritionist, and she said that's probably the best thing to have before a long run. And I just like them.
yeah, it's like a
The,
little treat.
the only time I eat Pop Tarts is before I run. It's the only time. I used to eat two of them. I can't even eat two anymore. And then when I do a marathon, I alternate Gatorade with water, and then I bring Smarties, the little candy,
Yeah.
the tablets. I discovered those um, probably when I was about 40. I was coaching cross country team, and I was going to a marathon, and this girl gave me a Smarties necklace, and she goes, Coach, I want you to wear this, and if it's gonna make you look cool, but if you get hungry at 22 or 24, eat it, and it'll. And I discovered I think I was trying to run sub 3 hours, and I got to 23, and I was starting to bonk a little bit, and I says, I'm gonna eat this necklace. I ate it, and the rush that it gave me, that sugar, glucose, and everything. I ran the last 2 miles at 6:30 a mile.
Wow.
So the Smarties have been huge. I'm not, I'm not against gel or goo. They didn't exist in my day, but I tried one once and I thought I was going to throw up. I just don't like
Yeah.
them.
It's a
I
weird
don't,
texture.
I don't like them at all. And um, so that's my fueling. It's very, very simple, very basic, and very, you know, you know, traditional for me. So the stuff that people say on TikTok, and they take them on in their training runs and they're popping these things, and I'm like, man, what are they doing? I'm not
Yeah.
criticizing them. I said, I barely can, carry anything with me. I have a belt that I put my car keys in, because I used to put my car keys on my tire. For years I would just
Yeah.
store them on my tire, but you can't do that
Different
now.
world, yeah.
And it just it's a different world. So a lot of the times when I trained, I would just put water bottles out on the different parts of the course, or come back to them, and so on and so forth. And I'm very, very basic, and I think my stomach wouldn't it would get sick if I took some of the stuff that they have at the aid stations at the marathons. I was running Boston one year in the early 80s, and back then the spectators gave you drinks, not they didn't have aid stations. Well, they had a
Mm.
few, but not as many. And I was running probably at the 24-mile mark, and somebody gave me a plastic cup, and I swilled it thinking it was water. It was vodka.
Oh
So
my gosh, vodka is way more aggressive than I was expecting.
yeah, so I stopped taking uh,
Strangers.
strangers, So I've basically seen it all, but that was my favorite because I swallowed it, because you just boom. And
Right.
I was running pretty quick. I didn't get sick. I was surprised. I got a good buzz though. I got a
I'm
definite
sure.
definite buzz off it. So yeah, that was funny.
That's so funny. I had a similar one where they had Gatorade cups so you couldn't see through it. It wasn't like clear or anything like that during my first marathon. And they had one side that was doing Gatorade and one side that was doing fireball shots. And I
Oh,
grabbed the fireball. Thankfully, the fireball you can smell it. It's not clear,
oh
obviously. So
my
I
God.
looked in there, but yeah, I'm like, they need to be a little bit more careful or distinguish when they're handing out alcohol at these races.
Exactly, exactly. That's right.
So funny. Well, cool. And I usually give the disclaimer. I didn't for this one, but fuel is so individual. I like you said, if that's what works for your body. If you took a gel right now, it'd probably upset your stomach. I think it's like that for everybody. So just a reminder to try out all different fuel options for yourself. Some people like more natural options. There's also gels out there, but everybody's so individual in your fuel journey. So do what works best for your body.
And you're right. Everybody is different, and I don't care who it is. There isn't no two runners are alike in terms of how they train, how they fuel. Everybody's different. That's why it's hard to sometimes run with. I've had a lot of running partners over the years that have been great. And when I was faster and younger, that worked. But now I have to do my own thing, because
Yeah.
sometimes I walk my first mile, and nobody wants to walk for a mile. And so I do everything by myself. And some days I like to run, and some days I don't like to run. So it's all individual, and it's hard to find that perfect running mate. Certainly at Boston, it's almost impossible to run with somebody, because there's just so many people. I mean, they're
Yeah.
everywhere, and you get caught up in them, and it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Cool. And then other question is shoes. What have you liked for shoes over time?
Well, I was a Converse guy when I was working for him, but I was a big Nike guy because I worked for Phil, and then I reunited with him when I had my store, and I sold exclusively Nike for a long time, and so we
Cool.
had a great working relationship. So when I left the industry, when I sold my store and went back into teaching, he asked me to be a tester for Nike. So for years I've tested shoes for Nike. So I like a lot of their shoes, but we get in battles. So I've been a big Nike guy, but I like Brooks also. I like the Brooks Glycerin
Yeah.
GTS. I like the Nike Vomero. I like firm shoes now. When I was younger, I liked cushioned, light, fast, flexible shoes. Now I have to wear very firm shoes that I call them old man shoes that are harder, and they don't let you do a lot of pronating and supinating and so on and
Mm,
so forth. And I I've watched shoes change so much over the years, seen good, bad, and the ugly. But yeah, I've strictly Nike for years, and then I've worked in my Brooks. I have Brooks on right now that I'm sitting here
perfect.
with. So it's
Yeah.
good, but a firmer shoe for the older guy.
Cool. Cool. Love it. All right, sweet. And then I always ask a question from the audience as well. So this question comes from Katie underscore Bell 31. Thank you so much for submitting a question. And her question for you is, if you couldn't run, what activity would you do instead?
That's a great question, Katie. I would be on the exercise bike at the YMCA till the day I died,
Yeah.
or someplace. I would be doing the recumbent bike or the Matrix, where you can, it's like a Peloton. I would do that. The Concept 2 rower, I was so competitive on that and so competitive in rowing. It's hard for me to get on that without like expecting me to, because I could, for 2,000 meters, I was low 6 minutes, which is extremely fast. And I just don't think I could. And I'd be afraid I'd hurt something because it, it's very, your shoulders, your lats. Maybe I
Mm.
should get on it. But it's a quadricep. Rowing is your quads. It's not your arms. Like I wasn't muscular, but I went to the Olympic trials in rowing, not running, and so that was a great activity. So yeah, it would be biking for me. That would be, and then I would also get in the pool, but more like the aqua jogging where you
Mm.
don't, I think that's a great activity for people that have impact. Like if you have impact issues where it's hurting your body, get in the pool, whether you have a vest or not. If you go into a pool and tread water for an hour, whew, that's a workout. It's not cardiovascular, but it works everything else, and you don't have the impact. So I would do something. I would definitely do something. That's why I'm very careful about the running, the activity of running, because I don't want to get to the point where I hurt something that doesn't allow me to do a cross training activity, if that makes any sense. And I
Totally.
would I would give up the streak at Boston if it meant that I could, I wouldn't jeopardize my longevity with overall fitness for Boston Marathon. It's a great, like, I don't think that you interviewed me if I said, like, say if I stopped Boston last year, say last year was my last at 46, and I didn't run last year. Boston, you probably would still be interviewing me, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Or, or if I was, I'll tell you the other one. What if I was a jerk? What if I was an arrogant jerk on TikTok, like putting down people's times? Would you be interviewing me?
Probably not.
Well, I think that transcends more. And I've been blessed with people that were mentors of mine that weren't arrogant, like the world-class marathoners that talked, how are you doing? Like, how you feeling, Mike? That to me means more. Now there are arrogant people,
Of course. Yeah.
and they're running, but I've met very few, very few. But the ones I've met, I just don't talk to. If they're that pompous, you know,
You don't need
um,
them.
I enjoy your TikToks because they're relatable. And I'll be honest, I don't know how fast you are, Taylor. I don't know how fast you are. I don't, because you don't brag on yourself, but you're probably a very decent runner. But it doesn't matter. You're a nice person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I follow people that are nice. That's the thing. You
Yeah.
know, do you know Amanda Runner? She's on TikTok. She's in Chicago.
Run with Amanda?
Yeah,
Yeah, I do. I actually interviewed her a couple weekends ago. That's so funny. She's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Love her.
She's I think she's trying to PR at the marathon this year. Is
I
that
think
right?
she is. Yeah, I think she is. Yep.
She has some great TikToks, and she's relatable and she's nice. So she'll
Yeah.
probably see this, and
I hope she does.
I'm giving her a shout out because she's I'm I like stuff like that. I love it when people don't mention their times. It's okay when they do, but I was going to jokingly say, is it okay for me to retroactively go back to one of my training runs from 1981 and pretend I'm in 1981 and mile 1, 5:02? You know,
Right, you should. That's so funny. Yeah.
I never got the chance to do it, so why not?
Right,
But
right.
I wouldn't do that. That would be kind of you know pompous, so to speak.
I love it though. I think that you're right. I think the running community are some of the best people that I've met. I think that it's just they're people that are aligned with the same goals that you're aligned with, which is half the battle. And then like you said, you meet really awesome humans that are just you carry those relationships with you and they motivate you and they keep you coming back to the sport. So I love the running community for the people. The people are amazing.
Well, I appreciate you doing this podcast. This is great.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
honored to be on
absolutely.
it.
I'm so glad that you were able to come on. And if anybody wants to follow along with you on TikTok, where can they find you?
Beeman, BMAN 363. But I am Run Boston 47. That will change if I do it in April. It'll be Run Boston 48. But
48.
BMAN, BMAN 363, I guess, is my name. But I think Instagram and TikTok, I'm Run Boston 47, I think. I don't understand all that stuff either. I'm not as many TikToks as I have and the followers, I'm not a great TikTok person. I throw stuff out there as I see needed, and then sometimes I get excited after a run and I slay the day and
Love that. Yeah.
all that stuff, up the steps. I made a sweatshirt with that, t-shirts and so on and so forth. And I'm on Clemson's campus. I know everybody has their favorite colleges, but I'm kind of partial to Clemson because I literally live in their backyard. I live
Yeah.
right there. And I made a t-shirt that said Clemson #slay.
Yeah.
And it's really caught on down there. I can't go on campus without being like, I'm more recognized for that than anything else. It's so funny.
I love
So
it.
I just have fun with it.
I love it. Yeah, and I'll brag about you for a second. If you're not following Mike on TikTok, please do. You have some of the more inspirational videos. I think that you do a great job of like breaking down little tips and tricks throughout the year and just inspiring, like you said, the next generation of runners. So I really appreciate your content, and I encourage everybody to go follow because it's just encouraging and awesome.
Well, thank you, Taylor. I sure do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. If you're enjoying My First Marathon, it would mean the world to me if you could rate and review the show. And if you or someone you know has ran a marathon and would like to share your story, I have a guest form to fill out in my bio on Instagram. That username is @MyFirstMarathonPod. See you on the next one.